Rated T for teen.
Hello and welcome to GAIA Cast, a spoiler-filled deep dive podcast into the world of Horizon from the team here at Guerrilla. We're looking forward to diving into the lore, hearing some behind-the-scenes anecdotes, and maybe even learning some new things. Our first series of episodes will be focusing on Horizon Zero Dawn, the first installment of the Horizon series, which we launched in 2017. I'm Chante, and I'm joined by my co-host, Anna. How's it going today, Anna?
I'm good, thank you. Last episode.
I know. I can't believe we're here already. For this episode, we are thrilled to be joined once again by Ben and Annie. Can you introduce yourselves for any of our new listeners?
So I'm Annie Kitain. I'm a senior writer here at Guerrilla. I'm part of the narrative team.
Yep, and I'm Ben McCaw. I'm the narrative director, and on Horizon Zero Dawn, I was the lead writer.
This episode, we're putting the threats and villains of Horizon Zero Dawn under the microscope. From human to AI, past and future, the world of Horizon is full of mystery and danger, something Aloy knows well. I'm really looking forward to this episode, the last one of the series. It's been fun and super interesting to hear from the team behind the game. What are your thoughts on this being the last episode?
Yeah, I really enjoyed all the devs talking about their stories, like their dev stories, and just hearing about Aloy's story again and all the machines and all the other plot points. Really great.
Yeah, and what are your thoughts on it being the last episode? What do you hope the listeners will take away from, the series?
I mean, I think when I really like a game or even a movie or whatever it is, it's just cool to get a little behind the scenes. And if I like a story, I kind of want to hear how it got designed. And that's, I think, part of the fun of this.
Mm.
Yeah, and I hope people find that this has been useful and it's sort of like a refresher on things that happened in Zero Dawn and getting excited for Forbidden West.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, I'm ready to go, so let's just get started.
Let's get started. So throughout Horizon Zero Dawn, we come across many threats and villains, and let's start with the AIs, Hades and Hephaestus. Can you tell us a little bit more about them?
Sure. I mean, I think just to take this briefly all the way back, Horizon in a lot of ways started as an art concept. So you had beautiful nature, you had the machines, the kind of megafauna, dinosaurs, and you had a tribal hunter, which became Aloy. And the idea that the reason that these machines existed as part of a terraforming system came a little bit later. And once that happened, it became really clear to us that we needed villains or AIs that represented different parts of the terraforming system and represented different threats in the game. So one of them had to be the main threat of the game, that's Hades. And we knew that was going to be represented by these kind of ancient, we call them warbots, or the sort of Farrow machines from the ancient past. But we also knew that we wanted the player to fight the terraforming machines, the grazers and the watchers and all that. So that's really the origin of Hephaestus. We needed this kind of other malevolent presence, although sort of understandable in some ways, but one that represents the main machines that you fight and gives you kind of a reason to fight them and gives the system a reason to create the combat machines. Because there's some machines that don't have terraforming functions at all. They're almost like purely combat. The Thunderjaw being like the classic example.
Yeah. Yep.
So that's sort of the origin of those two AIs in particular.
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing really interesting when you're playing the game is at a certain point you start to see Hades' name show up like in the subtitles, and it's, all capitalized, and it's different from everything else in the world around you, and you start to say, oh, okay, this is different. What is this? How does this relate to the past, and what does this mean for Aloy? So you start to get a little bit of a hint that there's more going on in the current world events, just when you start to hear and see Hades' name.
Yeah.
Yeah, and for people who haven't played it or played it a very long time ago, can you tell us a little bit more about Hades?
Absolutely. I mean, Hades represents the terraforming system's emergency reboot function. And, it's funny when we were developing this idea, we kind of questioned ourselves a little bit, was like, would the system have this? Mm-hmm. You've got obviously some of the AIs are obvious in their function, right? you need something to repair the skies. You need something to repair the land. You need something to repair the sea. Like that was like super obvious. We need something that represents animals, something that represents the plants and the growth and all that stuff. But we also wanted something that represents death. But the more we thought about it, the more the idea really took hold, which is that like, yes, this system would have this reboot function, because if you can imagine what an unprecedented, amazing technological effort this is, there's a chance it's going to fail, right? And so that's where the idea of this kind of reboot function came from. And actually, in our lore, in our backstory for the game, Hades actually does function correctly a few different times. That by the time you get to the world that Aloy sees, Hades has already activated a couple times, and these kind of non-viable biospheres have been discarded. So it worked, right?
Yeah.
Like in our backstory, it worked until it didn't. And that's obviously the start of a lot of problems in Horizon Zero Dawn.
And we know Hephaestus is this sort of AI that kind of sneaks around in the shadows and, has no contact with humans. Aloy's never spoken to Hephaestus directly. However, we also know this AI to be cruel in the way that it treated AI Scion, who we meet in the Frozen Wilds, quite a benevolent AI. How would you describe Hephaestus? How would Aloy describe Hephaestus?
Yeah, I mean, I think, Aloy would think of Hephaestus kind of like a jerk, just because, she's out there in Zero Dawn trying to solve, the mystery of her birth and her origins and the ancient past. And everywhere she goes, not only is she coming up against enemies like the Eclipse and human factions, but all the machines, So she's trying to go to a bunker or facility, and in comes a Thunderjaw or a Stormbird, and that gets in her way. And, because Hephaestus has created these machines, it's putting up these obstacles for her that she has to overcome. And at least initially, early on in the story, she doesn't really understand, that Hephaestus is behind this. It's just that the machines have been getting more dangerous and more deadly. But then over time, she learns more about Hephaestus, right? And she starts to understand a little bit more about how it functions and why it's doing some of these things. And even though she understands it, doesn't agree with it, and it's frustrating because, she's out there just trying to do her own thing, and these machines are trying to kill her.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that I wound up liking about the concept of Hephaestus is simply that there's some logic to what it's doing, right?
Yeah.
Like it wants to protect the system, and it doesn't mind doing a little killing of humans to protect the system. It knows that the terraforming system is, in a sense, in service to life, so it's not going to wipe people out or do anything on that scale, but it is going to protect the system, and people are attacking these machines, right? So it's a kind of natural response. But that response can be overwhelming, and Aloy winds up having to bear the brunt of it, through a lot of the game, because she has to tackle the sort of more and more powerful combat machines that he keeps throwing out.
Yeah. So, I mean, in that way, Hades and Hephaestus are similar because they are both trying to just accomplish what they were programmed to do. Hephaestus is just trying to protect the machines that it creates against hunters, which is a little bit less world-ending than Hades just trying to reboot the Earth over and over again.
So Ted Farrow is definitely one of the most hated villains that I've ever personally come across. And, I mean, there's a whole subreddit dedicated to people who absolutely hate him. It's great. So during development, were you aware of how hated this character would become?
I think, when we thought about Ted, dear old Ted, that it obviously comes from this central question in the game, which is like, how is it that the tribes have no knowledge of the ancient past? And we knew that there needed to be some kind of intervention that made that happen, right? Because obviously the creators of Zero Dawn would have tried to educate humanity in the future. So along comes Ted, right? And I think we kind of hated Ted when we were developing the project. But I also think that it was a bit of a love-hate because he's deeply human. Right? I mean, one of the things about Ted is that he's got a pretty good reason for doing what he does, which is he sort of wants to cover up his own mistakes,
Ted's selfishness and his greed can be felt almost a millennia later when we play Horizon Zero Dawn. How did the team approach creating his downfall while still making his intentions understandable to the player?
Whenever we created a character for Horizon, pretty much big or small, right? No matter what their role was in the game, we really wanted to make sure they had some kind of conflict, right? So, I mean, this is even true of like Elizabeth Sobek, right? She wants to save humanity desperately, but she's also a little bit distant from humanity, right? Like from the people around her. She's kind of a little bit of in an ivory tower. And this idea of conflict goes through sort of all the characters, from Aaron to Avad to Varl, all of them, right? So Ted needed to have that too. And that conflict in him really comes from actually part of him kind of wanting to do the right thing.
Yeah.
Which is, you know, he does spend trillions of dollars to fund Zero Dawn, and he knows that has to happen. But he also desperately wants to cover up his own role in what happened to the world. So in the end, that dark side wins out, right? And he does these truly like horrible things in order to cover that up. But that is the essence of why he's human. And it's also the essence of like why he works as a fantastic villain, because it's like you kind of get it. Like you don't like it, but you kind of get why it happens.
You know, Sun King Jiran also is a huge villain in the story, and he reaches some very high levels of success before making some decisions that lead to many, many sacrifices. These incredibly powerful, highly dangerous men that we meet in the story, they change the course of history with their actions. Is there a lesson to be learned here? Like, what makes these characters so scary?
Yeah, I mean, you know, Ben kind of touched on this already, but when we're designing the characters, we really dive into, you know, what are their desires? What are their fears? What's the conflict that they have? And part of that process is, you know, to make them feel real, we do look at examples in the real world, in history, or in even the current day. And I think that is what makes someone like Jiran or Ted Farrow so scary, is that it is possible because we've seen it before. And you see that it's the very Horizon version of it. It fits into our world and the events that are going on in our story.
Yeah.
But you see the shades of it.
I mean, the truth is you don't have to look far in our world to find a Ted Farrow or to find a religious fundamentalist who will do some really terrible things. And at the end of the day, that's kind of what Jiran is, or what he represents, right? Like he thinks that he can solve a kind of like metaphysical problem with human sacrifice. And that's really bad, right? Like that's not a good thing. But those viewpoints, they exist in our world, and especially in history. So we do kind of like think about that a lot as we develop characters throughout the franchise.
Yeah, moving on to Silence, he's more of a threat than a villain in the story. But even so, his intentions seem a bit worrying and muddled, for at least as you're playing the game. When you see him with Hades, that's especially worrying to me, at least at the end of Horizon Zero Dawn. And also like in the Horizon Forbidden West trailers, you also see him interact with Hades and see him a bit iffy.
It's shady.
Yeah, definitely. So how would Aloy describe her relationship with Silence?
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, Aloy sees Silence as someone, one, that she can talk to, because she has the focus. She knows a lot about the old world. She discovers that throughout Zero Dawn. Silence is someone who has made a lot of those discoveries on his own, and you know, he's the only person that she can talk to about those things. But at the same time, there's this intense competition between them, because you know, Silence wants to make these discoveries on his own. He wants that knowledge, and Aloy wants it as well. But the big difference between them, of course, is that Aloy has the ability to actually access some of these facilities because she's a clone of Elizabeth Sobek, and you know, there's a bit of jealousy there from Silence. And then I would also say, you know, on Aloy's part, she sees Silence as someone like a bit of a friend, a bit of an enemy, someone she can't fully trust because, you know, especially once she learns about his past with the Eclipse. And he even says that he would do it all again, just
Yeah.
with more safeguards. And that's, Aloy doesn't support that. She's very worried probably about that.
You just touched on his backstory. He's a very mysterious character, down to his backstory. When we discover his relationship with the Eclipse, I think it's quite a shocking story piece to the player. Can you enlighten us on his past at all? Like, where did he get this strong thirst for knowledge? And what was he like when he was younger?
So, one point I read a story about George Lucas, and this was like many years ago, before the franchise had kind of moved on, and he was asked about novelizations, and they were doing various novelizations of various characters in the Star Wars universe, and he would not let them do a novelization about Yoda. He felt that Yoda is simply sort of better left mysterious. And there's a little bit of that going on with Silence. Silence is not someone I think that we will ever sort of like plot out every aspect of his backstory for the player.
Yeah.
That said, I love Silence, and one of the reasons why I love him is because he is the ultimate self-made person.
Yeah.
Right? Like Aloy does a lot of hard work and teaches herself to read, like using the focus, and does some amazing things. But Silence is someone that for years toils in obscurity, trying to figure out the answers to the big questions of the world. And there's something, no matter how calculating he is, there's something so noble about that, that he's able to take the wreckage of the old world and to kind of look at the tribal world that sprouted up from it and sort of say, something's not right here.
Yeah.
Like what happened? And he sort of devotes his life to doing that. And there's something just incredibly admirable about it that I really like. With regard to the development of the game in Silence, one of my all-time favorite moments in the development of the whole thing was on the Frozen Wilds, because we were able to get Aloy and Silence together in the same booth. So for the entire development of Zero Dawn, Ash Birch and Lance Reddick were never together. Like we were able to get their voices, obviously quite a lot, but never in the same place. But there was this one moment on the Frozen Wilds where we got them in the same booth, and it was awesome. It was just awesome. It was like, because they understood exactly what Annie was saying here a second ago, which is that the heart of this relationship is competitiveness.
Yeah.
That they actually kind of have to work together, but they don't really want to, because they both kind of want to be the alpha in that relationship. And both actors really understood that, and it just sparked. It just sparked in the room, and you could feel it, and it came out in the game as well, and it was just great. And it's also, I mean, let's face it, like we just hit the jackpot, right, with both of those actors. They're amazing. They're absolutely amazing, and they both really know the characters well.
Yeah, I think so. That must have been the moments when Aloy and Silence are talking via focus when she's entering the Frozen Wilds.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there's just this real kind of like,
really
there's
sharp.
also one at the end. So there's one at the beginning, it sort of brackets the whole experience. And the one at the end gets real snippy.
It's a bit snide.
Well, because of your question.
Yeah.
Because Silence, Aloy has learned a little tiny fragment about Silence's backstory from Araya. So Araya kind of had this little encounter with Silence back in the day where he stole essentially a lot of Banuk old world artifacts. And that Aloy knows that about him, kind of gets to him, and he kind of cuts it off, and it just works great.
Hypothetically, the world is ending again, and you are heading to Elysium. You can pick either Duran, Ted, or Silence. Which one are you going to pick?
Well, I'll just interject for a second, just to make sure everyone understands what Elysium is, right? So with Zero Dawn, it's obviously a huge project. There's like all these different people that work on it, and they get a kind of reward. If you want to call it that, right? Which is that they get to kind of survive the end of the world in this kind of bunker where they can live out the rest of their natural lives, and in some cases, their families. I've always thought, like, wow, like that's not necessarily somewhere I want to be, because it's just the world's saddest place in some ways. It's just like you kind of live out, you're kind of running out the clock, before it's all over. So, Annie, I'll let you go first. I mean, I don't think this one's that hard. But
yeah, I mean, for me, it's obvious. It's definitely Silence, because with Duran or Ted, like that they're going to kill you at some point. Stuck in this place. Whereas Silence, like I'm not convinced I wouldn't die with, being with Silence for however long. But I know that he wouldn't want to kill me. It would mostly be because he has some other goal, some other thing, something else in mind, and I'm just collateral damage. So
Yes.
I'll rank it. How about that, right? So, I mean, totally agree with Annie, right? So, like, Silence would be number one because you might live through the experience. Not if he finds a reason, for you to have to die, but you'll probably live. I'd pick Duran number two.
Really?
Duran's number two because he'll be very honest with you. Like, that you're worth nothing and that he might have to kill you and probably will kill you, right?
Yeah.
Like, he's not going to hide that in any way. So here's the thing about Ted. If it were Ted, what Ted would do is that he would kind of pretend that everything was fine, or kind of pretend that maybe he wasn't going to kill you, but at the end of the day, like, maybe years later he'd get sick of you, and that's probably your fate. So I think that's kind of the worst version.
Yeah. No, I would have said Duran last, but now that I've heard your explanation, I do agree with it. I think Ted's probably the worst one.
Agreed. Definitely.
So now we're heading into the Forbidden West. It's not long to go now for our listeners. Can you tell us a bit about the Blight, why it's happening, and what it is?
Yeah, so it's been, 6 months since the end of Horizon Zero Dawn. And in that time, this mysterious red blight has started to spread across the land. And it's poisoning the crops, just sickening the land. And Aloy has been spending those 6 months trying to find out, where is this coming from?
Yeah.
What can she do to solve it, to save the world? So that's really like the lead into Forbidden West. And that's going to take her into the Forbidden West of trying to write that.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I really liked about the first game is that we were able to end it in a way that kind of sets up the sequel, which is that Aloy's job is only half done. Right? She has defeated Hades, and that is an extreme threat to the terraforming system. Mm-hmm. But in doing that, what she's learned is that Gaia, the controlling intelligence of the terraforming system, has ceased to exist. And she knows she's going to have to deal with that problem sooner or later. And sure enough, the Red Blight is a harbinger of that. And it's a really nice piece of continuity that kind of runs between both games in that sense.
And we know of some of the humans, they also pose a threat to Aloy as she travels through the Forbidden West, and they will affect the success of her mission. What can you tell us about the Regala tribe, who we've seen a bit of via, the gameplay that we've seen? Can you tell us a bit about them?
Yeah, so Regala is the leader of this rebel faction of Tenakth, the Tenakth tribe. And, they're very fierce warriors. And even worse for Aloy, they've learned how to override machines and ride them as mounts and send them into battle. So, that's a huge force that she's going to have to go up against time and again as she journeys through the Forbidden West.
Sure. So, yeah, just kind of bringing it back to Zero Dawn, too. There is a Tenakth in Zero Dawn.
Yeah, there is,
Yeah, there's one Tenakth, which is if you do the quest Sunstone Rock, which is a prison, that there's been kind of a breakout. One of the fugitives that you have to track down is actually Tenakth. And that's always been a kind of moment that I really liked because we actually did, a fair amount of thinking about the Tenakth during the development of Zero Dawn.
Yeah.
And yeah, I'm excited. I'm really excited for people to see kind of like way, way more about that tribe. You're going to get to see a rebel faction of the tribe. You're going to get to see the tribe itself. And I think people are they're going to like it. And they're also going to have a lot of forces to fight.
Yeah. I mean, some of the machines like we've seen already, there's like the Claw Striders, the Tremor Tusk, and those, are more, it's kind of related to what we were studying about Hephaestus, how it's been creating more deadly machines.
Yeah.
And so you combine those deadly machines with these fierce warriors, and that's just a huge, huge obstacle for Aloy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So on that note, what are you most excited about players experiencing in Horizon Forbidden West?
Well, for me, I mean, they're going to get to go into this whole cool, new, mysterious frontier, and they're going to meet some amazing new tribes. And we talked about it a little bit with Regala and the rebel faction of the Tenakth. You get to see a lot more of the Tenakth. You get to see some other tribes as well, and it's going to be pretty cool.
Yeah, and for me, there's so many. We have returning characters. We have Varl and Erin, so she has some friends coming back. Woohoo! But there's a lot of new characters, a lot of new NPCs that she'll meet throughout the Forbidden West, and I think people are going to really like these new characters as well.
Definitely.
And we're looking forward to you all experiencing it for yourself. We're coming up to the end of this episode now. Thanks so much for joining us today, Ben and Annie. The mysterious and deadly threats and villains throughout the world of Horizon Zero Dawn have turned Aloy's world upside down, but what an incredible adventure she had. Anything you'd like to say to our Gaia Cast listeners now that the series is finished?
Yeah, I mean, I would just like to say thank you. The response that we've gotten since the game came out to Aloy, to the game, to the franchise has just been extraordinary. And we love to hear from the fans and to see what they've put on the internet and their response to everything. So it's been great, and I just want to thank them.
Yeah, and I hope anyone who's been tuning into these, they find it informative and interesting, and it's just gotten them excited for the Forbidden West.
Let us know what you thought about this episode and series on social media. You can find us on Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. You can also interact with us via #HorizonGaiaCast. Thank you so much for joining us while we explored Horizon Zero Dawn with you all. We hope you enjoyed this series, hearing from the developers, and hopefully learned some new things. Your journey alongside Aloy out into the Forbidden West is just about to begin, and we'll be looking forward to hearing your thoughts as you undertake this next adventure. See you in the Forbidden West.